SLU International Business Now, Conversations That Matter is a podcast developed by the Boeing Institute of International Business in St. Louis University's Chaffetz School of Business. Special thanks to founder Dr. Sung Kim for his grant to support the launch of this podcast.
Welcome to the St. Louis University International Business Now podcast. My name is Todd Hovermale, and I'm excited to bring you Conversations That Matter. Today, we are joined by Dr. Manuel Piñuela, the co-founder and CEO of Cultivo, a global company committed to restoring 1% of the world's land to healthy ecosystems. Manuel, we are thrilled to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation, Tom.
We saw Manuel speak last year at the St. Louis University International Business Conference, and that's the first time that I became aware of Cultivo and the work that you are doing and its place in the nature tech sector. And we thought it would be a great idea for an episode. And today we're going to focus on your journey from a university student to entrepreneurship and the lessons that you've learned along the way and how you've grown and developed into the entrepreneur that you are today. And then also get your thoughts on how you see the future. So to start off with, if you could just briefly tell us a little bit about your story, tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Thanks, Todd. Happy to. So just for a bit of background for your listeners, my background is on electronic engineering, and I studied over at the National Autonomous University in Mexico City. And always since the beginning, the teachings that I was receiving, both fundamental in maths and physics, as you would expect in such a hardcore style of engineering, was that engineers were there to take science and bring it down to earth to solve problems for humanity. That's it. That was the setting that I was taught how to be an engineer. And actually, this whole journey starts when, since the day I can remember, I always wanted to be an inventor. And so electronic engineer was just one many of those things to pick to become an inventor. But where this started to flush out for me, as in the adrenaline and all of those juices that I think make up an entrepreneur, is that I got this project at the end of my undergrad degree where I had to create. The challenge was create an incubator, a neonatal incubator, with the equivalent of $5 of inputs. And the whole point was basically create what I think now, in hindsight, a startup is you have a lot of constraints with a big problem to tackle, and you need a lot of creativity to resolve it. And being able to successfully do it to the point that it even had some legs for it, where it could become even a company back more than 20 years ago. But it was actually a good product that worked, of course, not in a regulated setting, but good enough for veterinary care. So that to me was a bit of the first penny dropping to say, there's something here. When you're on purpose, create a series of constraints, they drive to innovation. And then I had the luck of being invited to a startup that was already in the beginnings of how to put solar street lamps to provide a pain point solution to unreliable grid, especially at streets in rural Mexico. And so it was a very quick series of steps where I got this opportunity to then start bringing practical solutions to a real life problem in Mexico, rural Mexico, specifically unreliable grid, as simple as when you don't have lights at night, commerce drops, criminality increases. Could there be a solution? And the solution that we had was put those street lamps out there, powered by the sun, but the real innovation was to connect them, now what you would consider Internet of Things, and be able to manage all of them remotely from Mexico City, even if you're hundreds of miles from it. And it really worked. You had a relatively simple customer base, which were municipalities, with all the complexities that comes from contracting at the government level. But the engineering innovation on that was actually doing this for the first time in a thing that was just launched called Google Maps. And the team at Google was, to my surprise, taking emails from me, which was another penny in this entrepreneurial journey, that if you want to walk a path where you're breaking barriers, you can just contact, as I did, a Google Maps engineer. And I said, do you have a thing called an API? They were not even called APIs back then. And they said, yeah, sure, here's the pipe. And it was an amazing experience to be able to connect this.
So early on in your story, what I'm hearing is you always wanted to be an inventor. You studied electrical engineering, and what that taught you was engineering is about solving problems for humanity. And then you had a project for the veterinarian industry where you were given a problem and with a lot of constraints. So you learned that constraints drive innovation, which then led you into this solar powered street light project. And then that led you to Google Maps and an awareness of how to work together with them. I mean,
That's
is
it.
that how the progression and some of those lessons that you learned along the way?
Exactly. And on that same journey, what I'm also learning are the things that you're never taught ever, I think, at least not back then in Mexico City, which was, how do you start contracting with governments? How do you start contracting or partnering with a large, now super large tech company? And in most cases, call it the wrapper for these two ideas was, in most cases, if you have a mission, therefore, normally a good mission is connected to solving a real pain point. Most people are out there are more than primed to help you achieve that crazy goal. And,
Hmm.
and that was just the beginnings for me, Todd, where realizing that when you have that power, which is just an idea, you're also able to connect a fundamental part of a startup, which is you need money to run it. Sure, it's good to have constraints and not a lot of money, because when you have a lot of money, then you are not focused. But it also helps drive that fundamental core to an entrepreneur's life, which is to be able to gather interest, capital interest, to make that idea real. Or to your point on the summary, there is, it ended up, that first idea, that first project ended up being for veterinary care, but it actually started as a neonatal incubator. So depending on the mission that you have, people call it pivots, but it goes back to being true to why you're doing what you're doing. That mission only serves you if you're true to it. And people are expecting you to be true to that mission. And of course, fast forward to where I'm at, and we're going to talk about that. That fundamental statement of a mission's ability to empower you at the personal level as an entrepreneur, but also the rest of the ecosystem that you need to thrive, is very real. And I think when you just pivot just to survive, then that mission starts to erode, and you start missing your guidance.
You know, what I find very interesting is how all of these layers upon layers, you know, keep propelling you down the road toward your calling and Cultivo. Tell us how then that all evolved into Cultivo.
Yeah, so let me fast forward. So after that first startup of the solar powered street lamps, I got then a first glimpse of, when it's a really good idea, you get interest. We got investments from a German family office. I was able to sell, what I was discovering was part of my shares in a cap table, super modest exit, but good enough to then start to think. I was 22. This was back in 2004. And it was at that point when you get this, or at least I got this nagging feeling of, I think I have to grow up. So I applied to work at a very large engineering and procurement company in Houston, Texas. And these are super large, ultra complex projects on facilities, on petrochemical plants, and different processing facilities. And yet I was back on the electronic phase, looking at instrumentation, what was the beginning of this advent of a lot of sensors out there and just realizing that almost no one was doing anything with those sensors. Why? Because the data was so vast that there wasn't the compute power or even the ability of processing that much data. And that to me, 2008, 2009 was a really good catalyst to then realize two things. One, I hated not being my own boss. So I'm just going to call it out. And two, that I was discovering that these super large companies always have pain points. And because of how big they are, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the time to solve those problems. Good enough for a startup. So I wanted to then have more meat to become a better inventor. So I decided to do a PhD over at Imperial College. The idea was, can I power those sensors for as long as possible without changing batteries? Or can I send power to them? And then at the same time, can I process all of this vast amount of data through better means? That translated into a wireless power transfer focus, powering sensors on water pollution and air pollution and soil pH levels and how a tree grows, which is called diameter at breast height, and at the same time creating the algorithms to process that data. And so when you mix it now in 2025, okay, it was AI through machine learning processing vast amount of data with the associated hardware to power all of those sensors. Fast forward that end of the PhD, got an amazing experience of presenting my patents and technology to former science and technology minister from the UK, Lord Drayson, and he literally said, "What are you going to do with this?" Well, I'm trying to sell the patents, going back to the US. I had a couple of offers and I said, nope, stop that. I'll invest back to the power of an idea. I'll invest. Let's start this together. So that was the start of Drayson Technologies. That effectively was licensing this wireless power transfer technology as well as the underlying machine learning to measure environmental variables, which created a product on air pollution that then took us very close to healthcare, very much on COPD and asthma, and then started moving into gestational diabetes. A lot of capital fundraised because of the power of the idea. And long story short, that Drayson Technologies got a spin-out called SENS.L that was listed in the London Stock Exchange about 7 years ago. And that was the point where I had been doing this plus a PhD for 10 years. And then this self-realization of, you know what, I think I'm good at taking that idea from the lab, bringing a series of stakeholders that really put their muscle and their capital towards an idea to make it real, to then start growing and operating a company. I really love that part. But then once it's big enough, there are a lot of other professionals. This was 7 years ago, and I had already, back to the inventor piece, more ideas that I wanted to test. And it was a really healthy point for me to say, at the point of ringing that bell, I'm out. All shareholders, back to communicating well, all shareholders knew about this. And that was the beginning of Cultivo. And the fundamentals of Cultivo as a journey is I've seen the power of what happens when you give to clinical staff data to make good decisions. And I said, well, what if we had that same power of data in a product that's solving a pain point to like the landscape behind me? The patient is nature. What do we need to do to that patient to heal it? And so that was one part of the equation. But because I was so exposed to capital markets and investors, I said, well, could this be also a really interesting point where ideally asset managers are allocating capital to nature? And lo and behold, this had already been going on. But what I was going back to the product creation was figuring out that pain point, that it seemed that it was complex, no data to make investment decisions, not enough understanding of the comorbidities of the patient for why it's not healthy. And that culminated in the creation of Cultivo being this platform that figures out very quickly what does the landscape need to be restored and how do you make that very attractive for investors to invest in it. And now 7 years from that idea behind the napkin, what Cultivo is a platform that develops infrastructure natural assets for what has been an evolution from family offices to asset managers to large institutionals, and now we're 1 degree of separation from pension funds and sovereigns. But it goes back to that mission of we want to restore nature. We have now proven that it is a fundamental industry, that nature is not just trees, it's a fundamental industry that we needed to exist, but it's also a great business. So proving that over the last 7 years has been an amazing journey, and thankfully we're starting to see how much the business is growing. But that's the full arc, Todd, of that journey.
I was hoping that you could share your experiences in fundraising, what's worked. You've had some success recently attracting capital more and more, as you said, asset managers, fund managers, pension funds, sovereign funds. They're recognizing the value and allocating capital to nature, to helping heal nature. But tell us what it was like in those early days. I'm sure it wasn't that easy. What worked for you, what didn't, what did you learn?
So the part where I would like to start in the fundraising journey is that it definitely gets easier. So even back at the conference where I met you, several students approached me and they said, "Hey, you make it sound very easy." It's never easy, but I've got to learn how to love it, because it's a very rewarding experience when you get through that phase. And it does get easier in the sense that the typical one that everyone will hear out there is that once you have track record, it's easier to fundraise. But that track record almost goes on to reset mode every time that you have a new idea. Either that's a new idea for a completely new venture, or a new idea to grow the business. And so let me start with the answer on what does it mean to fundraise for a completely new idea? What could be a venture? Because I think there's a false perception that just because you created a company, then the idea is flushed out. That's far from real. But what you need there is, well, a lot of people joke about it, but you do need this. It's family, friends, and fools. And at the end of the day, it is connected to, do you have a good idea? Do you think you have the fundamentals for what I then realize is the core of, are you for real with that idea, in the sense of, are you willing, because you're asking people to give you money, are you willing to dedicate the rest of the next, ideally 5 years as a minimum, to make that idea as real as possible? And so it's a proper commitment. And so once you pass that as an entrepreneur, rather than just bulldozing through it, which I did a couple of times, but now, with those scars on the back, just be true to yourself, then that commitment does carry a lot when you're having those conversations. Because at the end of the day, in such an early stage of an idea, what the investors are looking at is, who's the person for asking this? Is this just a nice thing to have, or are they going to dedicate their life? And personally, as an investor as well, that's what I check. Because at the end of the day, that idea is as good as a person or people that are going to be developing that idea.
So what I'm hearing you say is, when you're pitching your idea to attract capital to your investment, the key is you have to be passionate about this idea. The investors need to see you as the person that's going to dedicate their lives over the next several years to execute on this idea and make it successful. Does that sound right?
Spot on. Yeah, and I've got also experience of being the recipient of proto entrepreneurs saying, "Oh, I think I have an idea, and let's see if it works." You just lost me there. It's like, yeah, sure, that's an obvious one, but are you committed to make it work? That is a big thing.
Right. So how do you express that commitment to potential investors, whether they're friends, families, family offices, or even the other F, the fools?
Yeah. Well, the first one is that I think just an idea per se doesn't convey that commitment. I think the more you, and again, just part of those learnings is there's a fundamental part on being bootstrapping an idea and working on it and having sweat equity on it. So if you demonstrate that you and your team have been working on an idea for several months, if not years, and that you have, and this is really good for another reason, which is if you have already ingredients that are proving your market fit, or that at least that the market is quite favorable to the potential solution that you're bringing, you're ticking the boxes of you're proving that this is more than an idea. You're proving that actually you've put a lot of sweat on it. Therefore, you're even willing to risk non-paid hours to this thing that is your baby, and you care so much about it that it's sending both signals of you're really committed, so much so that you're not getting paid for it at the beginning, but also that you're testing the market. And the payback as to an entrepreneur on that front is that it gives you a lot more resources to demonstrate that it has a higher value. And that's the piece that I would start, that higher value at the beginning of a company or an idea is fundamental to when you run the fast forward of a venture. You don't want to, as an entrepreneur, be very diluted just in the beginning. So even the constructs as to how you, either you're using elements like a safe or a convertible note, or in the opposite, in the lack of that, or you're able to achieve a relatively high valuation versus your dilution, is really important, because if not, you might be super committed, but if you're hitting your A or your B round with less than 10% being owned by the co-founders of the business, then the carrots will not be there when things get really, really tough. And also really experienced investors will see that there won't be enough incentives to the founders to keep going at it. So you see, that's why I think the market balances this quite well at such an early stage of a venture.
Yeah, that's good advice. I'd love to spend more time here, but I'd also like to focus on another area that you mentioned, which is assembling a team, building a team, because you can't do it alone. You're not going to be able to execute on this idea and bring it to full success all by yourself. Not only do you need capital, but you need people. You need a great team. So how do you go about building that great team especially in those early days? What did you do?
I basically share a hell out of that idea with everyone that is saying and is willing to say, you know what? I love it so much so that can I start working with you? And that is the beginning of finding a co-founder. My complete bias in this is that I would never go on my own to do something like this. So I've heard many CEOs or entrepreneurs say, oh, it's a very lonely life to be a founder. And my answer has always been, it's not, because I've always had a co-founder. So I think that it also tests your ego, because you're sharing that idea, and I'd rather be with a group of super committed individuals that want to do this, and therefore it's also a great way of building a team that is very committed, and it stops being your idea, it starts being our idea. And at the same time, it goes back to fundraising. When you're pitching to someone and you say, I already have a team that is already committed to this, it also shows that muscle, right? Because no one can do a company on its own. And so just assembling that team also highlights something that I've never been as exposed to as with Cultivo, where my co-founder, James Clifton, and I, we've been working together for 9 years now. We've really put a lot of attention of the mission and therefore the associated culture to that mission, so that it permeates across the whole business, but that it also empowers that team that we've assembled and curated and shifted and morphed to be what it is right now, which is the best culture I've ever worked on, best working culture, is that you also empower that team to be able to have a voice in terms of what the business is doing. Goes back to the ego check. It doesn't mean that it's a complete democratic process, right? At the end of the day, a corporation needs leadership that takes decisions and goes forward. But in this day and age, I think that also has a different type of stakeholder needed so that that team has a voice. Because at the end of the day, this is people dedicating more than half of their day every day to an idea, regardless of the paycheck, right? So that's then my new journey on building what I think is the best culture that I've built with James, with now a full senior management team. And now I would say that culture is being built across the whole company. And so it's just really, really fulfilling to have a company that continues to morph on that culture and be realistic and pragmatic, but it's true to where we started 7 years ago.
Can you tell us a little bit of the story of how you and James came together as co-founders? Were you looking for a co-founder? I mean, what were you looking for in a co-founder, and why James? Why did that fit the bill?
Yeah, happy to. So look, the thing is that even when I met James, we, in my previous business, we were looking for a better market fit. And James came in as a very recommended person that also was a serial entrepreneur, good brain, very creative, very dynamic, and also a great operator. So by the time that we were hitting the IPO moment, I had already started to say to James, hey, look, I have some other ideas. And we were already friends by then. And we said, okay, let's just commit to something. We're going to share all of the ideas. And if one of those sticks, we do it together. And so that's what happened. So we would literally meet at the South Bank Centre in London. It's a perfect setting for inspiration, overlooking at the Thames, etc. And we started just, I think it was close to 3 to 6 months of just idea here, idea there. And when you have such a dynamic, friendly, non-ego conversation, you're able to just kill ideas left, right, and center and be able to punch them and kick the tires on them. And that's what we did. And so after, I think it was about 4 ideas, we started landing into Cultivo. We kicked it and kicked it and kicked it, and it's continued to survive because you're really trying to kill the idea, or at least that's our style. And then what was very obvious is that, okay, now this is our idea, and we started gathering momentum. So to your question, Todd, I always wanted a co-founder. I knew that, and so it was always in the DNA, if you wish, of the business. But what I was looking for was also someone that was able to strategically think on every difficult situation that is going to go on a business, but being able to also look forward rather than just being reactive, being very proactive. And James is that, right? I always give, I love music. And so James and I can be jazzing, just looking at each other, and he already knows what's the next tune or what's the change of rhythm, and how to follow each other. And back to egos, there's no question about whose idea is better, whose solution is better. We're just building on top of each other as you're constructing a good jazz song, right? So that's what I was looking for, and 9 years later, that continues to work. So it's also a relationship that needs a lot of care, right? As in any personal relationship that any of us care about, right? So
Right, you have to intentionally work on it and
correct.
help grow it, and so it will always thrive. Let's go into the mission and culture and how you and James work on that mission and culture, and how you evolve it and stay true to your mission, and yet things are constantly changing. So tell us about how you do that, how you work together to effectively build, work on your mission and culture.
So one of the in fact the very early parts of what started to define the culture was that we knew we didn't want to run the fake, almost TV-like Silicon Valley style of pizzas and beers and no one sleeps.
Hmm.
That works sometimes. Don't get me wrong, that works, but it's not sustainable. And given our mission of restoring 1% of the world's degraded landscapes, or even more realistic, just turning nature into a fundamental infrastructure asset, we knew that this was going to be a long-term play. So we wanted to be ready for ultra marathon style stamina. And so we really started working on the culture that created an internal muscle in everyone to be able to speed and sprint when needed, but be also able to be really conscious of personal well-being, as well as a balance of making sure that everyone was able to go deep in their area of expertise and solve a problem in the construct of a distributed team. So we were remote from the beginning. We knew we needed independent thinkers, especially at the beginning of the company. And so we wanted to be creating this very clear goals and be able to delegate and know that we trusted those individuals to get us to that goal. Because when you do that and you stop micromanaging, and I've done my big share of micromanagement in the past, is one, you get super frustrated because you're micromanaging everyone. But at the same time, you really slow down everything when you're not trusting the outputs of that talent. And what's the point of hiring talented people if you're not just letting them rip really with direction? And so this balance of having a really good quality of life, to be in the company for a long term, to be so wedded to your ideas and the mission, has allowed us to build a culture that loves working in the business and that you're bringing down churn. At some points in my career, I had experiences of 70 to 80% of churn of the staff in a company over a year, which to my surprise, the most common statistic that you can find on startups, especially Silicon Valley tech-driven startups, is that you have a churn of about 92% of staff over a year, which is, it's insane because you're building an idea and then you're restarting that knowledge transfer, if at all you have it. And so we really wanted to shift that, Todd. And so the evolution at the core of the business is, how do we make sure now with a bigger team, still small, but with a bigger team, how do you keep that that was relatively easy and high touch when we were 5 and then when we were 8, to be able to do that when we were 30 plus. And so the business has now created a lot of different dynamics to make sure that we're checking on individuals, but we're also empowering them in more dedicated tasks and roles to be able to have that driver of implementing ideas and then becoming very operational at the same time as having a good balance. And so we're always checking, more than I've ever done in my life, how everyone is. A lot of people say, well, that's super fluffy. It actually matters. I think it matters even more with millennials and Generation Z. And it works because we care about them.
Yeah, it sounds like you really care about your people, and you and James are building a great culture to accomplish your mission. How do you see, let's talk about the future a little bit in the context of your mission and culture. So you're 30 plus team members now. As you grow and evolve and add more team, how do you stay true to your mission and culture? How do you see the future of Cultivo, and what will it look like as you grow and have more success and add more people?
Well, you're finding me in an amazing spot, Todd, because we're already starting to see the beginnings of that future, where we've gone through this evolution that I briefly mentioned, like from relatively small pools of capital at the project level, like accredited investors, family offices, now very large institutionals that want to really scale this. And what that means is that we're starting to see also, after 7 years of hitting the mine, you start to see the inefficiencies as well as where the efficiencies would be. So the evolution for Cultivo is that we are vertically integrating towards North America, having a global reach where we have very selected ecosystem partners that allows us to vertically integrate in the area where we're growing the most, which is North America. And that what that means is that from a culture perspective is we're growing the number of the headcount is growing, but it also is growing with the right processes to manage those teams, so that we're never putting dilution of that culture and the emphasis on the individual, because with a cover of, oh, it's just that we're a lot. So where we're really testing the system right now, and I know we're going to get things wrong, is that we now need to scale those processes and systems to be able to support that same experience at an employee level with the scale that the business is now having. But at the same time, a vertical integration with a lot more focus helps remove a lot of the noise that makes all of those things not happen as efficiently as we wanted to. So the future is that we're also moving from institutional investors thinking that investing in a grassland, it could be an alternative type of investment to a fundamental infrastructure asset class. And so that also starts ticking the boxes that, for example, an investment manager at the pension fund says, okay, this actually has the revenues and the cash flows and the stability that I want for my fiduciary duties. And it just happens to be nature. And it has all of these positives to it. So from this type of infrastructure to another opportunity, they will always have a diversified portfolio, but being able to speak at that level about the grassland, about nature, is super exciting. And it's where we want to be hitting this, is that we will have millions of acres under management being restored and delivering returns to our investors.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that vision. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience? Just any parting thoughts or comments?
Yeah, just to add that I had a terrific time over at St. Louis University at the conference and got a lot of that energy from always being with students that are figuring out what's their next move, and just to prompt as much people as possible to join this industry that I'm in. It makes up for a very rich life in all aspects of it. So I highly encourage your listeners to join this new force.
Well, thank you very much. You're very kind. If any of our listeners, whether they be students or potential associates or investors, they would like to find out more about Cultivo, its mission, its culture, or they would like to contact you, how would you suggest they do that?
Yeah, please go to our website, www.cultivo.land, or over LinkedIn. Those would be our best channels. And if not, have to be reached out over email, which is also on the website. So please go ahead.
All right. Manuel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd.
To our listeners, we hope that you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Manuel Piñuela. We had a great conversation about Cultivo and the important work that they are doing to return land to healthy ecosystems around the world. If you learned something from this podcast, please support our show by leaving a review with your podcast provider. We hope you will join us next time as we continue to explore issues in international business. I'm Todd Hovermale, bringing you conversations that matter.
Thank you for tuning in to the SLU International Business Now Conversations That Matter podcast. We invite you to subscribe to this podcast series so you don't miss any future episodes. To learn more about the Executive Master of International Business program, please visit biib.slu.edu. Again, that's biib.slu.edu.